So welcome everyone. Today we are going to talk about accessibility and technology. Our club, our student club, is the Técnico Student Club for Mental Health and Inclusion. And we got together in 2020, in the beginning of the year, because we were all concerned with mental health issues in our community, in Técnico's community. And we reached out to Isabel Gonçalves from the NDA, which is the Academic Development Department in Técnico. And we started making a few talks about mental health issues with specialists on each area. Later on, we added inclusion to our topics because we think it's very important for reaching mental health, we need inclusion. Today, our speakers are Hugo Nicolau, who's a teacher from the informatics department in Técnico. I don't have an official translation for that. I searched for it, but I couldn't find it. And we have two PhD students, Isabel Neto and Filipe Rocha, and the three of them do a lot of research regarding accessibility, especially with children and blind and visually impaired children. The project that we're going to talk about today is a project that through robots, they want to increase cooperation in the classrooms with blind or visually impaired children and sighted children, so that the classrooms can be a more inclusive place and better for learning and growing. So the stage is yours.
Okay, can I take it away? Thank you, Francisca. That was awesome. I think I don't need to do the talk. You already introduced us. You explained the project, and that's it. But no, can I share my screen? All right. So let's try to do this. Share. Hopefully you're seeing something. Yeah. All right. Okay, so first of all, thank you for having us here today. It is a pleasure to be able to talk about our work in this forum. And today I'm going to talk about some of the work we've been doing, like Francisca said, using interactive robots for visually impaired children. So I'm not doing most of the talk. So Isabel and Filipe are here with me. They're actually doing most of the talk because this is mostly their work as well. So the credit is for her or for them. So I'll just introduce like a higher level perspective of what motivated our work and a perspective of what we do in general in our lab in inclusive technologies. Okay. So we come from the Interactive Technology Institute, which is a research lab here at Técnico. And we do a lot of multidisciplinary work, and I lead a team on this topic of inclusive computing or inclusive technologies. So first of all, before I start presenting our work, I would like to know what you think inclusion is. So when you think about inclusion, what's the first word or the first words that come to your mind, right? So if you can, just go to menti.com and use that code. I think it's the right one, but let me double check. Yep, should be right. And I need to share a different screen now. Do this one. All right. So when you think about inclusion, what words come to mind? And you can go. Okay, community, fairness, happiness, everybody. Accessible, diversity, happiness, equal opportunities, equality, fairness are already there. So everybody in community seems to be the big two words. I'm just going to wait 10 more seconds to see if something else comes up. Group differences, everyone, value. So we can see a pattern here of basically having a diverse community that includes everyone. So this is what I read here. Equal opportunities. I don't think so. No, it's the same words. And you are absolutely right. And usually when we think about inclusion, we think about including everyone in some sort of experience. But if you look at a framework for inclusion, in particularly for inclusive design, you basically can look at inclusion from different topics or different lenses or axes. So from class, culture, ethnicity, language, education, sexual orientation, disabilities, gender, race, and so forth. So inclusion sometimes means different things for different people because inclusion encompasses a lot of lenses or a lot of axes. So our talk today, we're going to focus on two axes. So obviously one is disabilities. So this is where I do most of my research. So when I say, or when I talk about inclusion, is mostly related with people with disabilities and also age. But we're not going to explore these topics separately. So the cool thing is that new exclusion factors emerge when you actually intersect more than one axis. So today we're going to talk about young children and how that intersects with disabilities, all right? So to start with, I'll start with a story. So it's always good to start with a story to motivate people. So this is Maria. So Maria is a third grader. She has 8 years old, loves taking long walks, doing puzzles with her parents, riding her bicycle, and playing video games on her phone, just like any other kid her age. She currently attends Ellen Keller, which is a mainstream school that has sighted and visually impaired students alike in the same classroom. Maria also has low vision due to cancer, and she's the only visually impaired student in her class. And here you can see Maria using a magnification screen during a class. So a magnification screen is just a TV with a camera pointing downwards that magnifies whatever the camera is pointing to. And she's very proficient in using this assistive technology. So it allows her to read books, write text, solve math problems. So all the usual stuff that you do in third grade. And it all seems great, right? She has an assistive technology that augments her abilities and allows her to be in class with her peers. Here in the photo, you can actually see some of her classmates right next to her and the teacher right there. So I'll get back to Maria in a second. So first, let me talk a little bit of what is our main field of study. So this is called human-computer interaction. For those who don't know what it is, it's the study of designing computer technology so that they best serve us, humans. So it's designing technology where you put people first. So designing for us, okay? For me, this is probably the most exciting field of research because you can study the most fascinating organism, which are humans, and the most fascinating technology, which are computers. And not only that, you can study the intersection between those two things. And you aren't just limited to study humans and study technology, but also design and create new interactive technologies. So this is why I'm very excited about HCI and accessible computing in particular. So as you can imagine, HCI combines a lot of fields from design, computing, and social sciences as well. So this is just an overview of the kind of projects we do, which are usually the intersection between human-computer interaction and inclusive technologies. So we usually start our projects conducting formative research with a lot of field work and working with individuals and communities in the real world. And then we apply participatory and co-design methods to prototype new solutions. And finally, at the end, we deploy them, or at least we try to deploy these solutions in the wild and assess its impact. So because our research is very much based on people rather than technology, we end up using multiple technologies from mobile devices to wearables, virtual reality, augmented reality, and robots. So today I'm going to focus on two particular projects that focus on the usage of interactive robots. Okay, so Isabel and Felipe will cover these two topics. All right, so if you have any questions, please interrupt, okay? I don't know what is the format of this talk, so be my guest. So let's get back to Maria. So here we can see Maria using her magnification screen, and it actually seems that she's perfectly embedded in the classroom. Again, with a classmate right next to her, they're both engaged in activities, both working, the teacher is in the background. It seems like she's following the class and doing all the proposed activities. Right, so what the picture doesn't show is this, right? Maria is often followed by a teaching assistant that helps her during class. Both of them are in a sort of like parallel classroom in their own bubble, and Maria never gets the chance to interact with her peers inside the classroom. And this was the main motivation for our work. From a series of observations we did in mainstream classrooms, particularly classrooms that have visually impaired children and sighted children, we found that the current practices and assistive technologies that they use can actually be a factor of exclusion, which is somehow counterintuitive, right? They're using assistive technologies, why are they not included in the classroom? But if you think about it, the truth is that these technologies are built to be used just by the visually impaired children. In a dynamic and collaborative environment, such as a classroom, where there's often group work and visual impaired children are just isolated, working by themselves with a teaching assistant and the assistive technology. So most of the work done in this field emphasizes accessibility over inclusion, focusing on the individual disabilities and providing access rather than focusing on the variety of abilities that exist in this context. And I want to be clear here, I'm not saying that assistive technologies are useless. I'm just saying that we need complementary approaches that foster collaborative learning, classroom participation, social engagement, and inclusion, all right? And this is what we're proposing, basically, is that technology should not focus on the individual, but rather should be designed for shared and collaborative use, and thus for a multitude of abilities, which is a significant break from the past research that is done in this field. And I'll leave it here, and Felipe and Isabel will present 2 lines of research that we've been pursuing under this concept, all right? And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay, so I'll start sharing my screen. So hello, everyone. I'm Felipe, I'm a PhD student. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about inclusive computational thinking. So this, in particularly in using robots to include children in computational thinking learning. So first of all, what is computational thinking? It can be defined as the thought process involved in formulating a problem and expressing it in a way that a computer, human or machine, can effectively carry it out. It's a skill that can be trained, and it borrows concepts from computer science, such as sequences or iterations, abstractions, debugging. So children can learn all of this at a very tender age, and it promises to impact their social, emotional, and cognitive development, and also to foster personal growth. So they learn computational thinking concepts through programming environments. And most of these programming environments, maybe you know them, are have a block-based syntax, like we can see here in the right image. So, for example, Scratch is a block-based syntax environment where children can drag and drop blocks to program a character, a virtual character, to do something that they want. We also have tangibles, so physical objects, that can facilitate the understanding of abstract concepts, which is very important for children when learning these concepts. They combine a hands-on approach with digital feedback and support a collaborative environment. So they support multiple children and pairs to work together to reach a common goal, so to program the robot, for example. Robots are also a tangible output, and they have multimodal capabilities. So they have lights and movement, and lights, movement, something's missing, and sound.
Sound.
Sorry. They have light, movement, and sound. So they can be used by visually impaired children because they can hear and follow the robot's behavior. With the interaction of a robot, they can also develop their spatial, creative, and orientation skills. So our work is focused on accessing and establishing computational thinking training for children with visual impairments through a fully accessible environment. We co-design with the children and the families and the educators. And here you can see two different systems that we already have and already showed some families and some children. So in the first one, you can see we have a big robot. So he's like this, something is kind of big. And children can program the robots with these physical blocks, and the robot will move in space in this sponge map. The one on the bottom, it's a tiny robot. He will move on top of a tactile path that is compatible with Lego blocks. So children can, if they already use Legos, if they are accustomed to play with Legos, they can adapt to use this little robot with it and program it with the physical blocks or with voice programming. We already evaluated the first one, the first environment, with 7 families, and so they were mixed visual ability families. We had just 1 children with visual impairments, and we could see that everyone in the family really enjoyed the experience, and they collaborated to program the robot to follow the activities. So here, for example, in the first one, in the first image, you can see it's a brother and sister. The brother is visually impaired, and they are collaborating to see where the robot has to go. Here, the robot had to meet the elephant that it's here on the gray square and had to avoid the penguin. So they were talking where the robot was faced and what should the next action be. So it was a really dynamic and, we think, inclusive activity and environment for them. Overall, the parents thought that the sound and the lights and the tactile cues, like the little eyebrows that the robot had, and the physical blocks were really important for children to be able to participate in these activities. And now I'll hand over to Isabel.
You're muted,
You're
Isabel.
muted. Still muted on Zoom.
Yeah, well, I think you are already hearing me. No? Okay. So my main focus, I'm also a PhD student. My main focus is on inclusive social robots and using social robots to promote inclusion in children with mixed visual, in groups of children with mixed visual abilities. And first, our main challenge is to try to understand what is inclusion and what's really the definition that we need to address and what is the problem that we need to address. So we based our definition of inclusion in social science and disability studies. And we start by using this definition as the role for all our work. And it's the degree to which each children perceive that is esteemed member of a classroom, applied to our case, classroom, and he experienced a treatment that his needs for belongingness and uniqueness. So where he perceives his unique voice and is valued by that, and by having the same access or equal opportunities and participation to all activities in the classroom. So what is our approach to try to foster inclusion? Well, our research approach is to extend social robots to promote inclusion in mixed visual activities. And why robots? Well, Philippe already mentioned they are a physical presence. They are very appealing to be used in classrooms. And nowadays they are cheaper and we can use it to augment the classroom experience and to help children to have the access to the same opportunities in the class. But before starting developing a social robot that promotes inclusion, we wanted to understand what were the barriers of inclusion in the classroom. So we started by doing a community engagement in a school, a mainstream school, where we tried to understand what were the barriers for a more inclusive environment in the school that social robots could address. Our main focus is on mixed visual ability schools and mixed visual ability classrooms. So we spent 4 months in a school, Central and Keller in Lisbon, and we tried to, by observation in classrooms, by interviewing parents, teachers, and also children, we tried to understand what were the challenges for sighted and for visual impaired children to have an interaction and to be more inclusive in their activities and in their group relations. So we tackle 7 barriers that robots could help. For instance, one that Hugo already mentioned, that is the lack of participation of visual impaired children in the classroom, because they normally have a bubble with the teacher assistants that is having a separate classroom and a separate way to do their work. Then the second barrier that we identify with the children and with the teachers was that normally we try to avoid any constraints on the children that have visual impaired. So normally we don't ask them to perform visually demanding tasks such as painting. And because of that, we are not challenged the children to to overcome their challenge. So there's something that we could try to use and to help in this process, for painting, for dancing, all kind of activities that we normally need some vision to perform. So social robots could help on that. And also there were a couple of other barriers that we tried to tackle, accepting the differences. It's always difficult for children that are sighted to interact with visual impaired, because sometimes they don't perceive each other, and vice versa. So it's important to understand how they can have a common communication process between all. And of course, a concern when we are in a classroom that is trying to recognize who is presenting, who is speaking, describing what is happening. So there's a couple of barriers that we can tackle and help to create a more inclusive environment in a mixed visual ability classroom. So we focus on participation in the classroom and the interaction. And we started by doing a participatory design in the classroom. So we work with 3 different classes during their lessons. We did the participatory design sessions with the main challenges groups for group activities accessible to all, where children in groups had to discuss and explore what were the problems to have a group activity that a robot could help. They presented, they critique each other, the sketches, the prototyping, and at the end they role play a scenario with the robot and the main functions and purpose that robot could have. At the end, we had more than 20 sketches and role plays. Children were able to build their robots. Of course, it's a prototype. They did it during the pandemic, so they did it at home. Most of them used recycled materials that they had at home, and focused their robots to solve specific problems related with a group activity that could help. It could be the projector to enlarge the information and amplify that. It could be giving power supply to the phones and the PCs. It could be a teacher assistant that creates braille information to the blind student at the class. It could be a storytelling that has some writing to help deaf people. So there were lots of ideas from the robots and lots of purposes. The main things that I wanted to highlight to this audience is that for them, the main reason for exclusion in a classroom was not really the impairments and the visual impairments that the children were facing, or the different capacities that they were facing, but more a lack of empathy between each other, and also some concerns on the traits and personality of them. So of course, impairment was the third reason for exclusion, but it was not first. The second highlight that I would like to pass to you is that VI children in a group work were pretty passive. So they normally are waiting for someone to ask them for their opinion, and that was the main problem that we tried to solve in our PhD. So our thesis hypothesis is to have a social robot that performs inclusive driven behaviors, or what it says is that promotes belongingness rate, to understand and recognize the uniqueness of each child, and by mediating small group discussions, they grant or they help to have a more equitable participation between all the members of the group, and also that their voices are heard and perceived. And what we are doing is a robot that mediates the conversation. And so he asks for the next child to speak in a small group conversation, manage the time that each speaker talks, praises when there's any interesting information. And with that, we hope to help children to foster inclusion in small groups. And I think that's it. I don't know if you want to add something.
No, I think that's it. I see a lot of questions in the chat. I'm not sure if I was supposed to answer them in the chat or we're going to explore them now.
Okay.
Yes, that was.
I'm going to stop the sharing.
Now I'm going to read out loud the questions because since we're live streaming to YouTube, people can know what the questions were afterwards.
Yeah.
And you can choose whoever wants to answer. Doesn't have to be just one person. So the first question we had was, how do you choose which specific problem setting to study at the start of a new project?
That's a very, very good question that is often asked. I'm not sure if I have the best answer for that. So usually I can tell you about my own experience, right? Usually I have interest by a specific topic. For instance, in this case was how do children with visually impaired experience a classroom setting, right? And then what we usually do, and this is part of our design process, is that we go into that setting and try to understand what happens. And as you've probably seen with Isabel's work, so she spent 4 months in the school just doing observations, interviews, talking with people, just working with the community from parents, children, teachers, therapists, and so forth. And then what you end up with is a bunch of problems that have the potential to be solved, not just with technology, but technology could help in some of these problems. And then the question becomes, which ones do you address? What usually happens is that you take into account the people's opinions, so which ones are more relevant to them, but then you need to balance as well which ones we have most potential to impact in a positive way. So that's usually what we do. I'm not sure if it is the best approach. We're all still learning here, but I think it's a feasible approach because, and this is something that it's hard for us as well. Like we can't solve all the problems, and it's not just about technology. Some of the issues cannot be solved by technology, and some of the issues need technology and other types of commitments. And I don't know if I answered the question or someone else wants to pitch in here, but that's usually what we do.
Mariana, okay. She said thank you, so I think it answered her question. Then Nivia asked, she recalled the last inclusion talk we had, the last inclusion brainstorm we had that featured Joana Lobantunes. Yeah. And she said, I remember that Joana Lobantunes said in the other brainstorm session that you cannot work with inclusion without adding the people that are supposed to be included in the equation. How is this being carried in your research, design, and implementation?
All right, I can start and answer that, and then I can pass the word. So I'm all in for the whole movement of nothing about us without us. And I hope that it was clear from our design process and from both works of Isabel and Felipe. So in Isabel, she spent a lot of time working with these people. And what we usually do, you usually use participatory research, meaning that the people we're designing with, and notice that I said designing with, not designing for, are part of the research team. So we aim to include them as much as possible in our own research. So Isabel spent a lot of time in schools. Felipe didn't have the time to go through the whole design process, but we did workshops with teachers. We did workshops with children. Then we got back to the teachers and comment on our findings if we're on the right track or not. So we have a lot of community involvement and engagement in order to tackle this issue. I'm all in for participatory research. That's mostly what we do. It doesn't make any sense to build technology just because you can, and then it does not fit the user's needs or goals or expectations, right? So that's what we try to tackle. I'm not sure if Isabella or Felipe want to say something.
Well, nothing. No, no. Just to point out that in my case, in my study, because I was in the classroom, I think it was even better because I work with the people in their context, not really in the lab doing something separate from their real life. They were using their books and their pencils and their materials at their homes. So they were really addressing a real problem. They were living that. Okay, and they were mixed visual ability groups. So that's it.
Yeah, and what we try to do with co-design and participatory methods is that they actually influence the research direction of our work, right? Because that's the only way it makes sense. Yeah. Again, not sure if I answered.
I think you answered it. Okay. I didn't ask this question, but it's a very good answer. Then I asked, what was the biggest surprise that came with the project, and what was the biggest challenge on working with children, both because of their disabilities, then because they are children.
I'll let Felipe and Isabel answer this one because they actually did the field work, not me.
Well, the biggest surprise, I don't know.
Or
I think
the outcome at your...
Yeah, I'm going to go with the biggest challenge first. So the biggest challenge is always because, okay, we think we know what children like, but maybe we are not exactly doing everything that they are used to do. And sometimes we are changing their dynamics a little bit. And I think that can be a challenge because we are there trying not to change their dynamics, but always changing because just our presence changes everything for them. Like maybe they stop paying so much attention to the teacher, or they are very focused on the new robot or the new blocks that we brought. And that's always a big challenge, to not know how they will react to that activity.
I actually thought you were going to mention COVID and how to do research,
oh,
like this kind
yeah,
of research
that's
of
true.
putting people
That's
in
true.
the pandemic. Yeah.
Because right in the beginning of our study, we stopped everything, so everyone was home, so we didn't have access to the children. So we had to contact the families individually and ask them if they wanted to use our prototype. So that's why, I think that's why we had the 7 families, but maybe it could be a lot more if it wasn't for the pandemic. But they were really receptive. It was a bit longer, the study, but I like the outcome.
Okay, so can I had my major surprise? Well, my major surprise was to see the problems of inclusion through children's eyes, because I thought that it was the visual impairment that were the main factor for exclusion. And what children show me and reflected on their work was that really that is not so critical at this age. Okay, it's different between ages, but it was really a nice surprise, and it was a surprise. I was not expecting that. The challenge is, of course, it's COVID, because we changed between in present to remote, but I think it worked really well because we were using recycled materials, and it was important. Of course, as we had the opportunity to stay in the school for 4 months, it was easier to do this kind of process in school. So that maybe it's a huge challenge if we cannot get this close to a school. And I think the challenges are really when we are building something, we don't know what they are. For visual impaired, we don't really know what they are really perceiving. So we think that we know, but normally we don't know. How we address this challenge, we ask an adult that was a teacher in the school that was blind, and we did some testing, and we tried to explore what were the challenges for children that had visual impairment, and all the materials had to be approved by him and tested by him to have a better output for children.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is about another project that you have. And Nivi says, I see that you also have a project called Avatar to synthesize Portuguese Sign Language. Could you speak more about it and tell us if it's still active? Are there chances of having a tool available for download?
Right. Again, great question. So it's a very cool project, very different from the ones we talked today. So this one is focusing on deaf and hard of hearing people. And the whole point of the project is to have a translator from Portuguese text to LGP, so Portuguese Sign Language. So the project is ending, I think, in January, but it was supposed to end last month. So it will be active for a few more months. In terms of the question, if it is available for download, it is not, just because the 3D model, so it's just for a little detail, but if you're interested in the project, come and talk to me. I can share all the code and resources so you can use it, but I would ask you not to distribute it, because it's just a detail. The avatar that we're using, the 3D model, we cannot release it as open source. So we're working on a different 3D model right away until the end of the project, so we can release everything open source. But there's a lot of work to do in this field, and by no means the avatar is perfect. And this was the work that we did with computational linguists, with people from UCP, the Universidade Católica, which study language and are linguists. And it was a really, really cool project. Unfortunately, it's not open sourced yet, but hopefully it will be. But yeah, if you have more interest in the projects, come and talk to me. I can share everything.
This is especially interesting for our team because ever since we did that first inclusion talk, we realized that deaf people can't watch our brainstorms, and we at least live, because we make closed captions afterwards. But it's very expensive to have a translator.
Well, I can tell you right away, if your goal is to use it on this type of meeting and have a signing avatar next to us, it's not at that stage yet. So I'm just setting the expectations right. It's not ready to that kind of usage.
Yes. Okay. And then João asked if there is any other plans to extend this program to other blind people other than children.
Right. Not sure what program she's. or he's
I
talking
think,
about?
I think it's not the program, but the research on inclusive and cooperational skills. Because
Okay,
like
so
other older people.
right. So most of my research is with older people, so adults mostly, and blind adults. And I did a lot of research on mobile accessibility, so how we can turn this kind of devices accessible to them, like with a touch screen where you have no tactile cues. So there's a lot of work done in that field. We haven't tried to use interactive robots with adults, but maybe next year we'll have news for you. But yeah, I think it applies to other age groups as well. It just depends on the context, right? Because if for instance, if you maybe it does not make sense to, I don't know, have a computational thinking learning tool for that kind of user group. Maybe they're looking for something else. And again, this is the kind of thing you need to be careful, because can you do it? Yes. Would it be useful? Probably not. So you need to get in touch with these communities and work with them to see what makes sense.
But in that case, I think the work of Felipe can be pretty applied to other groups. What we have to change is really the scenario. It's not really the elephant and the penguin, but something else. But computational thinking, learning is useful for other ages. So I think we can, well, if the idea is to adapt to other ages, it's possible. In my project and trying to foster inclusion and to help people in a discussion to talk equally and to value each other ideas, that is applied to everyone. And independent on the age, independent on the ability, it's useful in every discussion, I would say.
Thank you for your answer. And another question is, I can see that using technology to promote inclusion is a very interesting approach. Is this approach possible for other kinds of disabilities? You mentioned deafness, so deafness, yes, deafness. So you can talk about other disabilities maybe.
Yeah, so again, there's a whole field of research called accessible computing that focuses on a lot of disability. So even in my own research, I do research with blind, visually impaired, deaf, hard of hearing, older adults, situationally impairments, stroke survivors. So obviously technology can be used in a lot of use cases and could be used as a tool to help a lot of different user groups, and that's what's exciting about this field. If you're talking about like this particular approach, for instance, of Isabel, of having a mediating robot in group conversations, yes, we've been talking about, for instance, applying it for other disabilities like intellectual disabilities. I think would be a very nice topic of research as well. So yeah, technology in general can be used in a lot of domains. You're muted, Francisco.
I was reading the last question and you already answered it. And so I don't think if anyone has any other questions. I think I have another one.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask also, based on your project, what was the biggest thing that you learned? That I want to know these kind of things, that what you learned, what you, I already asked the surprise, but yes, what was the biggest conclusion on the study?
I don't know. I'll give a general answer, and then Isabel and Felipe can provide the details. I think for me, I'm not sure if it was the biggest surprise or the major result we got. For me, it was satisfying seeing that we can actually create technologies to be shared by people with mixed abilities and can actually collaborate, and we can promote this inclusive experience of sharing a technology and an activity. So that for me is very, I would say satisfying. Maybe it's not surprising, but satisfying. So I think this is where I want to go in the future. So this is where I see my research.
Okay, so since, oh, okay, we have another question here. Do you feel that bigger inclusion was felt by these children? How about their mental health? Did you conclude something on it?
Anyone wants to take this one, or should I?
I think you should.
Okay, so that's actually a good question. I don't think we ever measure perceived inclusion, but we will. But I don't think we ever measured perceived inclusion. So one of the issues we have, or the challenges we have when working with children, is that the tools you use to, and the methods you use to evaluate their experience need to be simple enough and rigorous. And sometimes that's hard to do with children because they may not understand what you're trying to answer them. So sometimes it's hard to collect these perceived measures because they may not know what you're trying to get exactly. But we have some plans on that. Regarding mental health, that's something we did not explore at all. I do have someone working with stroke survivors and their families. So when you have a stroke, something that it's really affected besides cognitive and physical, it's your mental health. So we're trying to explore how can technology can alleviate this for stroke survivors and their families. So we're trying to involve all the stakeholders in this process and having technology improve that. But that's not something we've explored with these projects of Isabel and Felipe. And it's a very delicate problem as well. So it's not easy to explore, but yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, I think I answered that.
And very intimate as well. And
yeah.
Hard to measure with children who don't always know what their emotions are like in the first place. So since we don't have any other questions, I would like to thank you very much for coming today. I love this subject personally. And I think you did a wonderful job showing what you do and what technology can achieve when it's used for the good.
Thank you.
So I'm going to pass, I don't think this is an expression in English, but Eduarda, if you can please, I was going to say pass the word, but if you can please show and talk about the next brainstorm, which is going to be in Portuguese. We can talk about it in English. Eduarda. Okay, maybe I will talk a little bit about it. So we're going to about the imposter syndrome, and so we invited Andrea Santos, who is a psychologist, and you can see her whole experience there. And it's going to be a very interesting brainstorm. So we invite you all to see, because this is a very recurring problem and feeling in our day-to-day lives. It's going to be 29 November, and well, you're welcome. The link to sign in will be out soon. Once again, thank you very much all for coming, and see you next time.